Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday Hire webinar. As you can see from the lovely banner that we have up today, we will be talking all around working in TA within VC. And we've got the lovely Marty joining us. Chris, I'll hand over to you in a few minutes to do an
Cool.
intro, but maybe
Okay.
just start with, because we've got quite a global audience. I'm based here in London. Where are you in the world?
Sure. Yeah, I'm in Menlo Park, California, so San Francisco Bay Area. It's actually my hometown as well, so I have not gone far. But for those maybe a little less familiar with this part of the world, it's the town essentially next to Stanford University, so kind of epicenter of Silicon Valley, and about 45 minutes south without traffic from San Francisco.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Very, very nice. Well, as everyone joins, feel free to let us know where in the world you're joining from. It's always nice to see where we've got our audience from. Before we start, I guess I'll do a little bit of an intro just for anyone who might be newer to Hire, newer to our webinars as well. So my name is Kelly McGrath-Smith. I am the Community Director at Hire. Hire is a global community for internal TA and HR folk. We've got over 10,000 members at the moment, which is amazing. And part of, I guess, our mission and what we really look to do is to help really kind of elevate the industry. We see ourselves as the hive mind of TA, and it's always such a lovely opportunity to connect with people as well. Our main community is over on Slack, and there's lots of amazing conversations that go on there. We've got sub-interest groups and topics, whether you want to discuss something that's more pertinent to a HR perspective or a sourcing perspective. We kind of know that working often in TA and HR can sometimes feel like a little bit of a lonely role. There's a lot of folks who might be in a standalone role, or maybe you're building up a team, and actually having this community behind you to help, bounce ideas off folk or just understand what other people are doing. So I'll pop a little link here for anyone. If you're not already a member and you would like to join us, you can just head on over to hirehq.com. We love to host events virtual as well as in person. So every Wednesday we host our webinars. We do them at this time just to try and catch everyone, well, as many people as we can globally. So it's 4 o'clock UK time, 8 a.m. for Christmas time as well. So yeah, we try and put
Got
them
my
on.
coffee. Got my coffee.
Yeah, coffee. And I think, one of the things that we always do as well, they're always available on a replay as well. So if you ever can't join live, or actually you just want to revisit a webinar, because often the topics we discuss, people take notes, there's lots to learn and take from them. So you can always watch them on a replay as well. And I guess on that note, the person here that we are chatting to today, Chris, I will hand over to you to maybe give a little bit of an intro in terms of you and your background before we do a little bit of a deep dive into the topic of working in TA within VC.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you, Kelly. It's really fun to be here. I've certainly been to a couple of Hire events, and I've certainly broadened my network because of the community. I think one of the hard things in recruiting for me is finding a way to sort of lift my head up and not just be heads down all the time. It doesn't get any easier, and so I really appreciate the outlet. But anyway, sure. So my name is Chris Marty. I've been in talent for really better part of a decade now, about 11, 12 years. And I kind of joke that I've really been downsizing since I got my start in talent. So I now work as a partner at a VC firm, and we'll get a lot more into that. It's called Unusual Ventures. It's a really special place. But before joining Unusual, which was about 3 years ago, I really built my talent career in the startup space. I kind of discovered a passion for early stage companies, but it wasn't always there. I started in tech when I joined a small startup about 11 years ago, and 3 months into that journey, Google acquired this company, and it was it was this remarkable moment where I think early on, I sort of felt like I had achieved tech mecca. I mean, Google, like the benefits, this is perfect. And I kind of realized after being there for a while that despite being surrounded by tremendous people and a really great kind of infrastructure for learning the best of recruiting, I didn't have a lot of passion for hiring people into a large organization where I couldn't really see their fit and kind of make the personal connection. So that realization sort of started a journey through smaller companies. I spent some time at Dropbox, actually in sales, which was great experience. And I'm sure we'll get to that as well. I think there's a real sales mentality that the best recruiters have. Spent many years at a company called Wealthfront, where I really kind of formed, I would say, the arc of my recruiting story, did everything in recruiting there, from being a university recruiter to technical design hiring to leading an organization as we went through hypergrowth. And then most recently was at another startup before Unusual, that's similar to my first one, was acquired by Apple after me only being there about 10 months. So it's been a twist and turn journey. But I think through it all, what's really important to me is, as a recruiter, like understanding what you like about the job. There are so many things you can do in recruiting. And for me, it was finding places where I could really connect to not just the mission of the team, but the founding team. Because for me, if I can actually identify with the business, I'm better at my job. Like I'm selling something that I care about, as opposed to just a brand that might be an incredible brand, but something that's not personally as attractive to me. So a little bit about the journey to date.
Yeah, amazing. And I think as well, one of the things that we always like to say to people who are tuned in is, feel free to drop a comment or a question at
Please
any
do.
point as we go through. It's always lovely to have these sessions interactive. We will have a Q&A at the end as well, but sometimes, if we're talking about something in that moment and you just want to ask a question related to that, please do. The joy of watching these webinars live is you actually get your question answered. So, take advantage where you can. And I guess
100%. Like, let's make this a dialogue conversation. That is totally my MO. I do not want to just be talking at a screen. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think, this topic came up from, various discussions kind of within the hire community as well. I think, the last year has been quite tricky from like a market perspective in terms of what's been going on in the world of tech, the world of TA.
yes.
And I think there's a lot of people, questioning kind of maybe where they want to go, where they want to work. And I think the world of VC is something that maybe is a little bit unknown to some folk. Maybe for others, it's been something that they have been thinking about for a while. And actually, this feels like an opportunity to start to explore it a bit more. So
Sure.
maybe to start with, it might be good if you can kind of maybe chat us through, how you came into working in VC, because obviously your background, like you said, you're working kind of within these amazing companies. Was it always on your mind to work for a VC, or did it just kind of happen?
Sure. Yeah. Sure. Well, I think a lot to say on sort of the avenues you might think about when it comes to how you might personally get into the VC space. I think the truth is there's no certain path. Personally, it really wasn't something I was considering that much. Probably because I didn't have a great understanding of what this kind of role would entail. As I started to realize that there were opportunities to be on very small, intimate teams within VC working directly with founders, it became a lot more appealing to you. The personal story here is that, when my last company exited, I reached out to actually the former president of Wealthfront, who is a mentor of mine and somebody I really respected, somebody who kind of has a track record of picking really strong early stage teams. I mean, early at Facebook and Twitter and then in Quora. And it was just a networking conversation, sort of picking his brain on what do you think a next healthy step is for me based on these career aspirations. And, after that call, he sort of got back to me and said, have you thought about working here? What about a role here? And so I think a lot of times that, that the roles in VC aren't that scoped out. You kind of have to have the conversations, know some people, but be on their radar such that when an opportunity emerges, they sort of think of you first. So it was very lucky.
Yeah.
And I still feel like when I joined Unusual, I was walking into the unknown. But it's been a very rewarding experience so far. And, maybe it'd be helpful, Kelly, just to speak a bit to how we structure things and kind of generally how, we operate in VC, because it's not cookie cutter, I would say.
Yeah. I think that would be amazing, because I think as well, it sometimes feels like a little bit of a secret world where, as someone who doesn't work in VC, it's like, okay, I know different companies do it different, but I think it would be amazing if you can give us a bit of a breakdown and just bring it to life a bit for us.
Sure, totally. So, I mean, at a very, very basic level, right? I mean, the VC world, these are firms that can be anywhere from massive organizations that manage 30 billion in assets, right? You're talking about the Andreessens, the Sequoias, the Excels, the Benchmarks, on down to much smaller firms. And we sit somewhere in the middle, right? We manage about $1.5 billion in assets. We've raised 3 funds. The idea is that, you are investing in companies at various points of their growth journey. We tend to invest at the very early stage. So call that pre-seed or seed stage, writing a couple $1 million checks. There are many great VCs that invest at the growth stage. So when a company's already found product market fit, is running at 100 million in revenue, not 20 million in revenue, and you invest at that point to sort of take the team through going public and kind of the post IPO, the IPO experience. But this world of operating in VC is actually somewhat nascent, right? I mean, that the firms are based on the premise that the real core contributors are the investors who are sourcing these deals, much like any sales rep or recruiter is sourcing great leads or great candidates to close. And it's a cutthroat business. But in the past decade, especially as the market has become even more competitive in VC, and that's couldn't be more true given that we're in a market where, it's a little dicey right now, right? Not everybody's gonna make it. Firms are looking for ways to make themselves stand out to the best founders, right? The best founders who created a brilliant product are going to have choices. They can take money from Unusual. They can take money from somebody else. Firms have started hiring operators so that they can tell founders, not only will you get our money, but you will get somebody like a Chris or a sales leader to come alongside you in this journey and help really lift what you can accomplish with yourself, right? You can be a brilliant founder with a great product, but the truth is when you're early stage, you don't have a brand yet. And so you don't have the network, you don't have maybe the knowledge to do all of this hiring. And so, there are marketing partners in VC and sales partners. And the whole idea is bring your expertise, your credibility that you've gained doing the work over any number of years and become an asset and a partner to these founders. At Unusual specifically, we take a very focused approach. And that's what I love about my job here. Many talent partners are quite advisory in nature, right? They might support 100 different investments, an hour conversation here, hour there, really important, but you're not really digging your teeth into the meat of the work. We'll make 40 seed investments over 3 years, which sounds like a lot, but it's a pretty small number. And so I actually really focus on only a couple teams at once and don't just sort of advise, but actually will take on the hiring, whether it's running an executive search, helping a team set up the parameters for hypergrowth, building out a founding engineering team. That's what I love, is every new investment creates a different hiring challenge, and I can sort of bring my generalist lens to the table. But these roles are created very unequally, and so you really have to suss out, if you're considering VC, how does the VC firm feel about talent? Do they really respect it? And are their views about the importance of talent similar to mine? That's the most important thing. You're walking into an environment who gets the importance of what you're doing, and it's a little harder said than done, I think.
Yeah, just trying to find out that alignment at the start.
Exactly.
And I guess for folks that might be kind of looking at this as an option for them or super curious, maybe you can chat a little bit around that kind of almost like portfolio element where you
Sure.
are getting to work on multiple
Yeah.
projects, having come from a more I guess traditional perm background, maybe how that
Sure.
can shape up.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think that's I think the 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 biggest shock to me in making this transition wasn't the work that I was doing. I feel like I've done this in various forms over many years at both large companies and small companies. The shock for me, having been somebody who's always been in the internal environment, and I've never had the agency experience, which I think can be really valuable, is adjusting to this model where you'll go in for 4 months, you'll build a ridiculously strong relationship, you'll go on team offsites and really feel like you played a role in building this team, but realize that it's not permanent, right? You need to pull yourself out and sort of set the stage for them to be successful in recruiting moving forward. So sometimes after my work, I will help them bring on their first head of talent. You're never gone forever. You kind of find ways to cycle back, but adjusting to that sort of falling in love with a team and sort of pulling yourself away, I think that's been a real experience for me. And I assume many of you on this call have a mix of internal and agency and executive search. And for me, it was just something very, very new, but I've grown to love, because you just get to see an exponential number of problems compared to being part of one organization. And yet you're always missing that kind of one team, one dream, because there are so many teams and you're kind of chasing so many different things. So that was the big surprise for me.
Yeah, and I guess like it's kind of similar. So at Talentful, we have an embedded model, and
Yes.
what that looks like is, we work on one client for a specific period of time. So that might be, say, 6 months. In your role, are you kind of juggling? We'll say you mentioned like that 4 month period. Are you juggling multiple clients over that period? And I guess how do you kind of, maybe if that is the case, switch those hats on a weekly basis?
It's super hard. I mean, that's the hardest thing. And I think I'm always doing the mental calculation of, there are more teams than I can serve in a really full service, execution driven way than I can support. But I know that if I can be all in on two teams, I can produce results so much faster, and thereby then take on a real effective engagement once I wrap something up. So it's a real constant discussion with, the others on my team. The operating team has about 6 of us, not all in talent. There's another talent person, and our investors, trying to understand within our investment portfolio, who is really on the upswing, who is running at a new milestone, like where are the real priorities in talent? And you have to be forward looking for that, such that I know in 6 months, my bandwidth will look like this. That's a good target. I'm going to start building a relationship here. But my work starts to degrade when I'm taking on too much and stretched too thinly. And so it's counterintuitive, I think, because in recruiting, we all know that kind of the more recs you have, the more hires tend to just come in. But for me, if you're trying to make work happen in such a truncated period, you need to find ways to block out the noise and focus. Too much context switching in recruiting, telling different stories, you're telling different pitches. You want to minimize that so you can actually focus on doing good work.
Absolutely. And I find, prior to my work with startups and scale ups, my observations of VCs were more from a purely funding perspective. And I remember when I joined like a scale up business, and we were working really closely with the VC partners, and the person in there from the VC dropped in basically as kind of interim CPO, chief talent. I was like, this is really interesting, because it hadn't been on my radar that was, I guess, some of the work that can happen within VC, which is a huge exposure for people in that role. Maybe you can talk around, what you can get from a VC that maybe people don't realize as like a huge selling point for your career as you progress.
Sure, totally. Well, I think Look, I mean, I think, and recruiters do this the best. Like, that's why I love meeting recruiters, because we're naturally good at telling stories and like understanding how you sort of cobble a career together such that your story lines up for the next engagement and what you want to do next. Um, a couple thoughts on this. I think number one, I will say, I think too many, I guess I speak to a few too many recruiters who are a bit too early career to get into recruiting or to get
Mm,
into VC,
yeah.
because you can really only be effective when you're working across so many different teams if you've seen a lot and sort of bring just a bit of a pattern matching approach to all the things you need to do. What can happen if you go in a little too early to a VC is then you realize, gosh, I need more operating experience. And you end up kind of having to go back to that world to then come back, which is fine. I think that's okay. The best thing about my broadening of the skill set in VC, though, is you have to realize, like, even though I'm engaging with our founders because they have real talent needs and hiring is a priority, these are teams in a lot of cases at the early stage who, certainly don't have internal recruiters, but they don't have a head of people. They don't have much of they haven't done much thinking in many cases around anything people related. And so while I always had an interest in the more pure people operations side of building an organization, and I think as my leadership roles expanded at places like Wealthfront, I would take on more of that
Mm,
performance management or compensation and leveling. Just because I'm sort of the best person to help out founders to do it, I am always not just thinking about recruiting, but all right, once you hire this team, how do you make sure they stay? Like, what is your compensation philosophy such that, when you hit 20 people, there's not internal squabbling because you're not paying people fairly. So I think there's been a real acceleration in my leveling up of the HR side of things in talent, which, if one day I want to go be a chief people officer at a larger tech company, I think there's the possibility of that.
mm,
I'm a recruiter. I don't pretend that like that's really what I want to get into, but you can just take on so much more in scope than you're going to take on, not just because the recruiting challenges are different, but because you are an authority figure for these founders and they're relying on you. And so I'm always pinging heads of people that I respect and getting their take on interesting scenarios. And it's been a real learning experience for me. So I think that's one interesting element. I think, I guess lastly, I'd say a really fun part of the role, and I know that other talent partners that I meet with communicate this as well, that there's a really fun component to helping teams find their first head of talent
mm,
and sort of being that unofficial mentor to just help them set the stage for what hypergrowth might look like. I mean, if we had another 2 hours, we could just wax on about like, what is that early talent team structure? How do you build that? But because I care so much about that and believe that it's critical for startups to succeed, the role
mm,
I get to play in helping shape that, even when I'm gone, by bringing in the right mind and kind of setting up the right values, the right recruiting culture, making sure everybody understands the importance of closing candidates. It's not the recruiter's job, yada, yada, yada. I love that component. And so I think you become a real mentor figure if you want to
mm.
in the VC space, as well.
Yeah.
A couple thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And it is that element of, because you're there at the very start, you really do get that like strategic input into, what is best practice. Like you said, a lot of these businesses don't have a people function, they have no talent function. So
That's
you
right.
almost have that clean slate. And in terms of then, that aspect of kind of bringing on and building that TA team, like I
Yeah.
know it's probably different for every client that you work with, but
Yes.
how long do you typically get to kind of steer the ship, or help on board the kind of the permanent TA person that you help hire? Do you get a little bit of
Sure.
time as a mentor with them?
Totally. I mean, I think it really is so dependent on the growth trajectory of the company and sort of like the immediate needs that they have. There are teams that I have, in fact, one team I'm working with right now, we led the seed round for them a couple of years ago. I met when they were 2 people, these amazing founders. They're now 35 people, and I've sort of re-engaged as they're really entering this hypergrowth stage to help do some of this. Let's build out a real recruiting organization work. So I think you're always kind of moving in and out. But I mean, I look, I have strong opinions on this, but I think there's rarely a team, even in a weird climate like today, where you're not trying to spend a lot of money, who invests as properly and as much as they should in talent in the early going. Teams are always playing catch up. So I'm a really big believer in, when you're hitting 30 people at a startup and you've raised an A round and maybe you're running at a B round, don't hire one recruiter and then hire another one when you're 100 people. Build out right away a core critical team of 4, right? You've got your head recruiter, technical recruiter, sourcer, and a coordinator. That is a working unit that you can polish and mold, kind of like a sports team that is capable of building a recruiting engine that gets you from 30 people to 250. You can do that with 4 people. The problem is kind of one-off hiring in recruiting over time means the engine's not gelling, there's too much change. And so I always tell heads of talent to advocate early on for building that infrastructure that sort of gives weight to the talent operation. I mean, I talk about like holistic hiring and this, like, you just need to have a motion that's always building. And so, I'm coaching a lot of teams to think about the nature of what your recruiting team should look like and how to build it, which is a fun part of the role, because I think teams still get that wrong. And let's be honest, we all know it's not easy to advocate for recruiting budget. I think a lot of it's often very misunderstood, the amount of work that goes into it and the importance you have of folks dedicated to it. So many founders think, I got a role to post, let's post a role, we'll fill it, we'll take it down. They kind of do this recreation process every time, start from scratch, wind it down, versus starting to put in place a foundation that can build on itself. Interviewers know exactly what to do every time. You have a compensation philosophy, right? You got to put that in place early, and you can't be a team of 1 to do that. So a lot of advocating for what is it going to take to build a world-class recruiting team, even when you're small. I think that's really important to me.
Super interesting. And we've actually just got a question pop in that probably makes sense to take now from James. So he's asked, when you were working with founders on developing existing teams for teams you have previously worked with, do you have a pre-existing retention or succession plan in place that you can work off of, or are you starting from scratch?
That's a really good question. When I'm circling back to teams, it's usually because I did very early work with them, and it was, I'm here, I am advocating, put in this foundation as early as you can. But in a lot of cases, even with great teams at 25 or 30, that is when you're really building out the foundational work. And so I think while founders should have kind of the values in place such that when they're hiring team members 2 through 10, they can speak to things like, we're a merit-based culture. We will not just give you cash raises, but equity bumps when you perform well. It's really at that 25 to 30 person stage where determining how you make compensation decisions is key, and communicating that and documenting that. It's really at that stage when a performance review process is critical, because it's as more and more team members hit real tenure moments, when you don't have those things, you get into real trouble. If there's not a good compensation philosophy in place, your best team members, when they hit 2.5 years, they're going to leave because their vesting is over. And so it really all, the policy work, I think, does come in a little bit later, even if I'm sort of planting the seeds for these founders early on about these are the things to think about, right? Don't overcomplicate it with some structured policy now, but this should be on your radar. When you hit these growth milestones, this needs to be in place. So I don't know. I hope that helps a little bit, but let me know if you want me to clarify a bit, James.
Perfect. And yes, feel free, anyone else, if you've got questions before we hit the Q&A section, feel free to pop them in as well. And I guess, Chris, what would be good to touch upon a bit is, I guess, looking at kind of the current market from your perspective, working in VC. Have you kind of noticed any changes over the coming months in terms of what it may look like from a TA, from an investment perspective over the next while?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what a time to be in talent. I mean, it's been brutal. I think, honestly, I think like I am floored by the number of amazing TA folks who are looking for work or looking for a different kind of work. I really do think that the needle is starting to shift back in the direction of growth. You know, the overarching themes are the shakeout and kind of this reconciliation of many startups failing. That's ultimately a good thing because it means the best are surviving. Mm-hmm. And in the coming 3 to 6 months, for those of us in talent paying attention, it will become clearer and clearer which teams are really on like hyper growth footing, will exist to stay, and we can latch onto those teams. You can go be a recruiter there. Also, it's, you know, kind of offsetting the tension of so many companies struggling to raise money who have poor unit economics is the fact that generative AI is here and it's not Web3, right? This is as transformative as the mobile era. And so similarly to over the next 6 months, we will see which pre-existing startups will survive. Mm-hmm. You're also going to get a whole new crop of companies that are very well funded, who have the legs to be major movers and shakers. I mean, if you think back to the pandemic, you know, in 2020, after the little mini crash, we went on a boom for 2 years, right? The money was back. And I think over the next 2 years, you're going to see many new unicorns being created in this space that is so nascent. But again, if you're paying attention and thinking about joining a startup, what are all the factors that mitigate risk? Quality of founders, quality of investors, quality of product, is their product market fit? It's not easy, but if you're diligent about that, there will be so many opportunities, especially if you're willing to join something early, to get in and be part of a real success story. And I'm biased because I clearly am just a complete nut for startups, but one of my core beliefs is that if you really want to accelerate your career, whether you're in recruiting or sales, anything, you know, join an early stage company that has the signs of traction. Because if you do that and you pick the right one, frankly, you're going to get way more credit than you deserve for the success of that company. You want to be attached to things that are successful. And if you join a company of 50 and it goes to 350 in 4 years, even if you leave, by being an early team member and a strong performer, you are the one who gets to decide what you do at that company. I mean, if I hadn't joined Wealthfront at 30 and helped it grow, I would never have gotten to do all the different things in recruiting that I was looking for. And so it takes diligence, but I think in the next 3 years, for recruiters who are thinking thoughtfully about when to join a company and which company to join, it will really serve as a career accelerator. And I would argue more so than, you know, maybe spending another few years at Facebook or Google, which are great places, but you'll be tasked with taking on less. Mm. And if you join something early, the chaos does really generate learnings at a pace that I think you can't access elsewhere. So, you know, that's kind of how I see the market now. And I think for those who are in a great position already, start having conversations. Just be open. I think the hardest part about finding a new job is that when you dip your toe into the market, if you're a strong candidate, and I know many on this call are, you're going to find that an offer hits your inbox. But if you haven't tested the waters and had a lot of conversations, you might get an offer and realize, God, like I haven't seen enough out there to even know if this is the one I want. And so even if your search is not critical or not immediate, and maybe you're looking at a transition date sometime next year, as more and more companies are born, have a conversation or two. Like take the time to refine the story you're telling about your career, such that when you actually are interviewing for the role you really want, you're going to crush it. It's like practice. And so I think there's a lot to be excited about, despite kind of the turmoil of the past.
Oh, let's hope so. I think everyone can do it a bit of a boost. And I think maybe on that note of, maybe folks who are either currently looking or, thinking about it when the market picks up, in terms of people interested in particularly moving to VC or exploring VC, is there any advice or kind of insight that you can share that's maybe a little bit more nuanced to that industry?
Sure. Yeah, I wish I had something more concrete there. I think the natural place to start is if you have been somebody in talent who's been fortunate enough to work at startups that have seen success, go back to the investors that invested in that company, because they probably remember you and they probably know the good work that you did, and they also definitely know a bunch of other companies they've just invested in who they want to have the same trajectory as the one that you were at a year ago or 3 years ago or 5 years ago. And so if you sort of put out onto their radar that not just you're interested in the VC space potentially, but other early stage teams that are growing, it's kind of like a two birds, one stone thing. I think a lot of candidates who maybe are really eyeing the VC side will become connected to so many interesting startups as part of that process, that you then realize maybe that's a great option for me. So I think that's number one, is like think back about the investors that know you've been at a successful company because they really, really want to recreate that. I think too, and this isn't rocket science, but it's not easy. You just got to do it, is you have to be aggressive. You have to cold outbound. If I was doing a search right now, I would be creating a list of the 50 VC firms that I most respect and admire. I'm lucky I hope I'll be unusual for many years to come, but these teams don't always even know they're looking for somebody, right? A lot of these firms maybe don't have a talent partner yet. And so I have gotten many peers who, like me, like an opportunity was sort of created because you expressed some interest. And so you just got to go out there and email the general partners or other operators at the firm and just put out into the world that you're curious about the space. I know many who got their start by just advising one or two portfolio companies, just because it was great experience, such that when the VC wanted to bring in somebody full time, they're the really natural choice. So I think you really got to put yourself out there, especially in VC, where it's not good, but it's true. These firms are just not good about publishing these roles or even promoting these roles. There's a little too much scatterbrained energy internally when you're thinking about founders and investments. The internal hiring process for VCs could use some work, I guess is the bottom line.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think it is that piece, like, I know we spoke about this actually even before today. It is a bit more of a networking focus. And like you said, they may not actually realize that this is the person that they need in the business.
Yeah.
I think that was really useful. We're just about at time. So do pop in any questions before we wrap up. We've got one here saying, Chris, when you are coming onto a new engagement and the team has a dedicated HR representative, do you tailor your approach to fit the new team you're working with, or do you have to persuade the team to shift their direction in hiring to kind of align to the VC's approach?
Yeah, sure. Awesome question. And I'm so glad that this was asked, because this is really important. It never works if I approach an engagement or anybody on my team approaches an engagement with more of a heavy-handed, this is the only way to do it. I think that the joy in my role comes from the fact that every new team I work with, I'm doing this calculation across their recruiting skill set. Okay, these founders are good at closing, they can tell a good story, but they don't understand comp, right? Or gosh, they understand the technical thing, but they can't tell a story. I got to teach them that pitch. So it is rarely just trying to bring in something that I've seen work previously to match it. What you need to do is understand all the unique intricacies of what makes this team special, and then actually build for them based on that. So, sometimes the one HR person is an excellent recruiter and is a great face of the team. For those engagements, I'll lean into best sourcing approach and help them find really interesting third parties to work with to boost top of funnel, because I know that they're going to close the good candidates. So it is certainly, founders wouldn't want to work with us if we had a reputation for just trying to push an agenda, right? At the end of the day, we want these teams to be successful in their own way. And we want them to learn best practices to carry it forward, because we're not going to be there forever. And so it's really important to kind of meet them in that moment. Of course, I have strong opinions, and I believe there is a right way to hire for a startup. That's why I do what I do. And so I will always be layering in those learnings and those lessons. I'm just realizing too, in the first question, I think I might have missed a piece of that around kind of succession plans or kind of pre-existing retention plans. Similar to this answer, I think, while I'll do a bit more pattern matching when it comes to a performance review cycle that I know really works. You have to start with, what are these teams' values? Like, what do they care about, and build from there. I think we get into a lot of trouble in HR when we just try to put in place something that worked for one team and expect it to work for another. There's a real analytical consulting-esque component to building something from scratch that meets a really specific need. What if the team does not seem sustainable? Best practices, current practices in place aren't really panning out. I think if there are real issues at hand, then you do need to take more of a directive-based approach, right? At the end of the day, these are, we only win as a VC, and we only make returns for our limited partners, who are hospitals and educational institutions, if these companies succeed. And so there are totally hard conversations. I mean, there are times where they've made a hire that's not going to work for a certain function, and that is a blocker. In a lot of cases, I'm not always the one to communicate that. I think many times the investors, who have a different kind of relationship, will do some of that. But you're definitely not just going with the flow. If there's a real issue, part of the job is having your ears to the ground and seeing around the corners before that is an actual problem, right? If you've got an early sales leader who might be able to close business, but clearly can't close any of their own hires, they can't scale a sales org. So you got to get ahead of that. So a couple thoughts there.
Amazing. Yeah, some really interesting questions. And it's always great to have these come through in these live conversations as well, because they're so key to what we're talking about. Chris, that was really, really interesting. I think it's one of those conversations that there is so much to unpack, and you could actually talk for hours in terms of, VC and also the landscape at the moment. And I think, look, time will tell over the next few months what actually, we're looking at. But like you said, hopefully it is kind of on that more positive trajectory. And, at the very least, we've got kind of this time for folks to, I guess, start to think about what is the right move for them if they're, either unemployed at the moment or potentially looking to make a move over the next few months as well.
That's right. And I think just to punctuate that, and I'll kind of give one or two more minutes of thoughts here, and if there are any more questions, amazing. Is it's such a good time. I think one of the real learnings that has emerged for me over the past couple of years that I am so grateful for is the time I spent really understanding what I like about recruiting. I think so many early recruiters who are excellent, like anybody, right? We're attracted to these extraordinary brands. It seems obvious. It's easier to recruit, and my job is more fun if I'm helping get candidates in the door who already know about this place and want to work there. The problem with that is the kind of recruiting work that the actions that the job entails at companies like that, they're just not what I'm good at. Like I'm a storyteller. I want to be with the candidate, painting a picture, communicating why if you come here now and this company wins, it will be life changing. I don't, I'm not really a great sourcer. I can do it. So I think like it's a great time for anybody in recruiting to think really carefully about what about the recruiting job do you like? A lot of us rush into managing because we think that it's what we should do. I certainly did that at Wealthfront. I didn't know there was another option. I loved it. It was cool experience, but I like being responsible for myself these days and working with founders. And so use this kind of interim period, if you have one, to think about what you like about your job and what exactly that means for what you want to do next. Because I think a lot of us don't actually take the time to do that sort of introspection. I worked in sales for a year because I really thought, God, it would be great if I understood more innately what a pipeline looks like and how to really close candidates. I don't think enough recruiters do that. I think too many of us fill a big pipeline and kind of cross our fingers. That experience for me, spending a year selling an enterprise product, taught me to focus on the leads that we're going to close, like preach to the converted. So it's just think about the learnings you need and what you like to do and use that to tee up, right? Like the next experience. Don't just run at a glossy brand, because look, the buzziest companies 3 years ago are the ones that are going through their sixth round of layoffs right now. So it's a changing, it's a changing environment for sure. And luckily there are these swings, there are these ups and downs, and it always comes back around in recruiting, but it's a good time to do some introspection. So
really good advice there. And I think, like like you said, if you can do a bit of a deep dive into what you like, what you don't like. We also have for anyone in the hire community or new, we have a backlog of our old webinars. Oh, I say old, but we started in May, so they're not that old. All around kind of job hunting. We have a career coach with us for some of ours. So what I'll do is I'll just pop the link here. So if you head on over, there's a whole heap of like a library catalog. They should also be available on LinkedIn as well. So everyone can access those as well. But sometimes it's nice to be able to revisit these things and kind of mull things over if you do have the space to do so as well. But Chris, thank you so much. This was such an amazing conversation. Really appreciate you spending the time chatting to us today, because I know it's early in the morning for you. I know you say you're an early bird, but it's been great to have you. And for anyone who's joining, we will also have a webinar next week. So next week we've got conversation all around TA Slowdown, which we're really kind of looking at how you can start to pivot your team, when the need changes from high growth, when it slows down, how you can manage, how you can motivate your team, how you can create adaptability in your team as well, and kind of change those hats. And I think as leaders, if you have worked for a company which has been more fast paced, a lot of your direct reports are used to getting that buzz from filling roles. So it's like, how do you start to change that mentality? Where can TA functions add value from a process improvement perspective? And how can a TA function really show value to a business when they're not hiring? So do join us for that one. That will be same time next Wednesday. So that'll be 4 o'clock UK time, 8 a.m. PST, so San Fran. And I think it'll be 11 a.m. New York time. I'm starting to get all of my all of my time zones just embedded into my mind at this point. But we will leave you all for today. Hope you enjoyed the webinar. Chris, like I said, lovely to have you here. We will hopefully connect again very soon. And thank you so much for your time.
Definitely. Yeah, Kelly, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, I mean, for those on the call, reach out. Let's connect. I love connecting with anybody in talent who geeks out on this space as much as I do. So, anyways, yeah. See y'all next time.
See you later, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.